Have you ever loved a house? I don't just mean the wood and the nails, the roof over your head. I mean, have you ever loved a place so much that its memories are soaked right into the walls? For 50 years, this house in Kansas City was my world. It was the last thing my Frank and I built together, with our own hands and our own dreams. And it only took my son one single word to burn it all down to the ground. It's funny, the stories that shape us. The ones we tell ourselves and the ones we share with others. They're what keep us going, I think. It's why I'm telling you this now. Because there's a quiet strength in being heard, and maybe my story can help someone else feel a little less alone in their own fight. If you believe in that power, well, perhaps you'll subscribe and become a part of this community. We all deserve a place where our voices matter. This house, it was more than a home. It was a witness. The faint pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe tracked my son Michael's growth from a toddler to a man who towered over me. The worn spot on the floral armchair in the living room was the exact shape of my Frank's shoulders, where he sat every evening for 40 years reading the paper. I could still smell his pipe tobacco there if I closed my eyes and really tried. After he passed, the silence was the hardest part. But the house held his memory, so it never felt truly empty. It was my fortress, my history. I'm a practical woman. I was a high school principal for 35 years, and you don't survive that long without being able to face facts. Plain and simple, the house was getting old. And so was I. The roof needed work, the property taxes kept climbing, and the big oak in the backyard was looking a little too close to the power lines. I had a handle on it. I always did. So when Michael came over that Tuesday afternoon, I thought it was just his usual weekly visit. But something was off. He didn't look at me when he spoke, his eyes darting around the living room like he was casing the joint. He fidgeted with his car keys, the metallic jingle echoing in the quiet room. He talked about the economy, about interest rates, about the cost of everything. "It's a lot, Mom," he said, his voice strained. "A house this size for just one person." I straightened my back. I felt a familiar prickle of pride. "I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, Michael. We've been over this." I know you are. It's just I worry." He stood up and started pacing, walking over to the big bay window that overlooked the garden. Frank's garden. "The upkeep, the repairs, it all falls on you. And on me, I have to help." I narrowed my eyes. My hearing is as sharp as it ever was. "I haven't asked you for a dime, Michael." "That's not the point." He turned, his face flushed with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It looked like frustration, but there was something else underneath it, something sour. "I have my own family to think about. Victoria and the kids, a mortgage. I'm stretched thin as it is. I want to help, I do, but..." He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. I waited. A principal knows how to wait. You let the silence do the work. You let them talk themselves into the truth. He took a deep breath and finally looked at me. His eyes were my Frank's eyes, but the look in them was foreign. It was the look of a stranger. "I'm just trying to be realistic, Mom," he said, his voice dropping. Sometimes this all feels like a burden." There it was, the word. It didn't land like a firecracker. It was worse. It was like a drop of poison that instantly spread through every vein in my body, cold and absolute. The grandfather clock in the hall seemed to stop ticking. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the window felt weak and gray. My fortress, my beautiful home, suddenly felt like a cage, and I was the prisoner rattling the bars. Burden. A thing to be carried with difficulty. A heavy load. I had looked it up in the dictionary 1,000 times when teaching vocabulary, but I never imagined it would one day be used to describe me, by my own son, the little boy whose height was still marked on the kitchen door. He must have seen the look on my face because he immediately started backpedaling. "No, Mom, I didn't mean, I just meant the house, the logistics of it all. Not you, never you." But the truth, once it's out, can't be put back in. It was out there, hanging in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. The trust I'd spent a lifetime building with my son felt like a pane of glass that had just been shattered. All that was left were jagged, dangerous pieces. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my mind a blank slate where all my loving memories had just been wiped clean. I just gave him a slow, deliberate nod. The kind of nod I used to give a student before I expelled them. A nod that said, "I have heard you, and this changes everything." He left soon after that, Mum. Ling excuses. The front door clicked shut, and the silence that rushed back in was different. It was heavier now. It was the sound of being alone. I sat in Frank's armchair, the floral one, and I didn't move for a very long time. I just sat there in my fortress of memories while my son's word echoed in every single empty room. Burden, burden, burden. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Tick, tock. Each sound was a second of my new reality. A life where I was no longer a mother, a matriarch, a pillar of strength. A burden, I whispered to the empty space, and the words tasted like ash in my mouth. That's what I am now. My mind, the one I'd always trusted to be sharp and logical, felt like a messy, cluttered room. I tried to organize the thought. I tried to put it in a box and label it. But it was a slippery, monstrous thing that wouldn't be contained. For hours, I just sat there, replaying the scene. The look on Michael's face, the way he couldn't meet my eyes, the sound of that word. It wasn't just a word. It was a judgment, a verdict on my life. My 79 years of living, loving, teaching, and raising a family, all reduced to a single, ugly noun. But after the shock, something else began to creep in. A principal's habit, I suppose. When a problem arises, you gather evidence. You look for patterns. My mind, desperate to make sense of the nonsensical, started flipping back through the pages of the last few months. And that's when I started to see her. Victoria, my daughter-in-law, her perfectly made-up face always smiling. Her voice always sweet, always dripping with concern. I remembered the Sunday dinner just after Easter. She'd looked around my kitchen, the one where I taught her how to make Frank's favorite pot roast, and she'd sighed dramatically. "Oh, Carol, this is just divine, but goodness, this kitchen is enormous. I honestly don't know how you managed to keep it all so sparkling clean." At the time, I'd beamed. I took it as a compliment to my enduring capability. But now the words felt different. They felt like an assessment, a measurement of my decline. Then there was the phone call from a few weeks ago. "We were just talking about you," she'd chirped when I answered. "Michael and we just worry sick about you rattling around in this huge place all by yourself. What if you fell and couldn't get to the phone?" Her concern had felt so genuine, so loving. I'd been touched. Now I felt a cold dread trickle down my spine. It wasn't concern. It was a seed, a carefully planted seed of doubt in my own independence. One by one, the memories surfaced, each one now tainted by the word burden. Victoria mentioning how her own mother's friend, a woman named Shirley, had sold her big family house and moved into a lovely little condo community. "She's so much happier now, Carol. Honestly. She has a book club, social events, and no yard work to worry about. She says it's like being on a permanent vacation." Every comment, every gentle suggestion, every worried glance, they weren't random acts of kindness. They were a campaign. A slow, methodical chipping away at my confidence, designed to make me see my own home, my own life, as a problem to be solved. And my son, my own son, was her soldier. He was the one she sent in to deliver the final, killing blow. The thought made me sick to my stomach. This wasn't just Michael's fleeting frustration. This was a strategy. And I, the principal who could spot a lie from a mile away, had walked right into it. My pride in my own judgment felt like a fool's game. Defeated, I pushed myself out of Frank's armchair. The joints in my knees ached, and for the first time I felt every single one of my 79 years. I walked into the study and sat down at Frank's old oak desk. His picture was there, smiling at me from a silver frame. He looked so proud. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. I was failing him. I was failing this house. My hands trembled as I opened the laptop. The screen glowed in the dim room, bright and unforgiving. I typed the words into the search bar, each letter a small surrender. Condos for sale in Kansas City. The results flooded the screen, dozens of them, all beige walls and cold granite countertops, all with names like Willow Creek Estates or The Summit at Mill Creek. They were soulless boxes, devoid of history or warmth. I clicked on one. The virtual tour showed an open-plan living space with furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. There were no pencil marks on the door frames, no worn spots in the armchairs, no ghosts of a life well lived. There was just space. Empty, meaningless space. I imagined myself there, alone with my few boxes of memories. I would be safe, I would be secure, and I would not be a burden to anyone. The thought brought no comfort, only a profound, bottomless sadness. A single tear escaped and traced a hoe. Tea-path down my wrinkled cheek, splashing onto the trackpad. I stared at the picture of the sterile, perfect condo, and then I looked over at the photo of Frank. His smiling eyes seemed to ask a question I couldn't answer. I closed the laptop, the soft click echoing the sound of a door being shut on my own life. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's time, I thought, and the words tasted like ash in my mouth. That night, sleep was a stranger. I tossed and turned in the big bed I had once shared with Frank, the sheets feeling cold and unfamiliar. Every creak of the old house sounded like an accusation. Every shadow looked like a memory I was preparing to abandon. The plan was simple. In the morning, I would call a realtor. I would begin the process of dismantling my life, packing it into boxes, and fading quietly into a beige-colored condo. I would be less of a burden. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely. My throat was dry. I slipped on my robe and made my way downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was bathed in moonlight, the familiar furniture casting long, distorted shadows on the floor. It was beautiful in a lonely sort of way. As I stood at the sink, I saw it. A sweep of headlights cutting across the living room wall, followed by the soft crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. My first thought was a jolt of panic, an intruder, but then I recognized the low rumble of the engine. It was Michael's car. My panic quickly turned to a mother's worry. What were they doing here at this hour? Had something happened to one of the grandkids? I instinctively moved away from the window, flattening myself against the wall in the shadows of the hallway that led from the kitchen. I didn't want to frighten them if they were just stopping by for some reason. The car engine cut off, and the silence of the night returned, thicker than before. I expected a knock on the door, but none came. Instead, I heard voices. They were low, muffled by the glass of the car, but the kitchen window was cracked open just an inch, and the sound carried on the still night air. It was Michael's voice first, laced with a guilt I recognized instantly. "I don't know, Vicky. She looked broken today. I've never seen her look so defeated." Then came Victoria's reply, and the sound of it made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. The sweetness, the gentle concern she always used with me was gone. This voice was sharp, impatient, and cold as steel. "Don't go soft on me now, Michael. Defeated is what we need. Did she say she'd sell? Did she agree to call a realtor?" My glass of water paused halfway to my lips. My breath caught in my throat. "I think so," Michael mumbled. But to call her a burden to her face, it felt wrong. A short, sharp laugh from Victoria, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Oh, grow up. It's not wrong, it's necessary. Listen to me. I spoke to the contact at Sterling Developments again today. Their offer for this entire block is non-negotiable, and it expires in 60 days. This isn't just about a new house for us. This is about the rest of our lives. We need that money. We need her to sell that house and the land it's on." Sterling Developments. The land. The pieces clicked into place in my mind with a horrifying, sickening snap. This wasn't about my well-being. This wasn't about me being lonely or the house being too big. This was a business transaction, and I wasn't a person in this equation. I was an obstacle. "She's my mother," Michael said, his voice weak, a final flicker of conscience. Victoria's voice was venomous. All the fakery stripped away, leaving only the raw, ugly greed beneath. She's an old woman sitting on a gold mine she doesn't even know she has. It's our duty to our children to secure that future. So you will hold it together and you will do what's necessary. You just have to keep telling her she's a burden until she breaks. Now, for the last time, did it work? Is she going to sell? The glass slipped from my fingers, not with a crash, but with a soft thud as it landed on the thick rug by the sink. I didn't even notice. My world had tilted on its axis. The hurt, the sadness, the lonely resignation I had been drowning in for the past 24 hours, it all evaporated in a flash of white-hot rage. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a family concerned for their matriarch. This was a conspiracy. A cold, calculated psychological attack to manipulate me out of my home, my legacy, my husband's memory, all for money. I backed away from the window, silent as a ghost. My movements were slow, steady, deliberate. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, but it wasn't a rhythm of fear. It was a war drum. The high school principal who could stare down the toughest kid without flinching, the woman who ran a school of 1,000 students with an iron will, the matriarch of this family, she was awake again. Now, I stood there in the darkness of the kitchen, listening as their car started up and quietly pulled away. They were leaving their victim to mourn, confident that she was broken. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. It wasn't about me being a burden. It was about them being predators, and I wasn't their prey. The fury came first, hot and pure. The woman I'd welcomed into my family, the son I had raised, I gripped the kitchen counter, my knuckles white, and just breathed for a full minute. The rage was a wild animal, and I let it have its moment. But then the principal in me took over. The part of me that never lost a battle of wits with a troublesome teenager, the part of me that understood one thing above all else: emotion is a weakness. Strategy is strength. Tears solve nothing. Action does. I didn't go back to bed. I went to the coffee pot and made a fresh, strong brew, my hands as steady as a surgeon S. The sun started to rise, painting the kitchen in pale shades of pink and gold. A new day, and with it, a new Carol. The sad, defeated old woman from yesterday was gone. In her place stood a general, and a battlefield had been drawn right through the heart of my home. They made a critical error. Two of them, actually. First, they mistook my love for weakness. Second, and far more foolishly, they underestimated me. They saw a 79-year-old widow. They forgot they were dealing with the woman who ran Northwood High for 35 years. After my first cup of coffee, I went into the study. On Frank's desk was the notepad where I'd scribbled down the name of the realtor Victoria had so helpfully suggested. Brenda at KC Homes. I picked up a black marker, and with a single, satisfying stroke, I drew a thick line through the name. It was a small act, but it was a declaration. I was no longer a pawn in their game. I was changing the board. My next action required more thought. I sat down in Frank's chair, the worn leather cool against my back, and I let my mind work. The hurt was still there, a hard, cold stone in the pit of my stomach, but my thoughts were clear. Crystal clear. They had a plan based on greed and deceit. I needed a better one based on truth and consequences. At precisely 9 o'clock, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was answered on the second ring. George Patterson speaking. George, it's Carol. His voice warmed instantly. George had been our lawyer and our friend for 40 years. He handled our wills, Frank's estate, and he'd been a rock for me when Frank passed. Carol, it's good to hear your voice. How are you holding up? Everything all right? Everything, I said, my voice calm and even, is about to be. I need your help, George, and I need your absolute discretion. There was a pause on the other end. George knew me. He knew I didn't waste words on drama. You have it, of course, he said, his tone shifting from friendly to professional. What's going on? I didn't pour out the whole story of betrayal and my wounded heart. That was for me to deal with. I gave him the facts, plain and simple, like I was presenting a case file. There is an unsolicited, and until last night, undisclosed offer to purchase my entire property. The interested party is a company called Sterling Developments. My son, Michael, and his wife, Victoria, are involved. I have concrete evidence that there is an active and deliberate conspiracy to defraud me by compelling me to sell under false pretenses and for a fraction of the land's true value. George was silent for a long moment. I could practically hear the gears turning in his legal mind. Conspiracy to defraud, he finally repeated. Carol, those are very strong words. They are the correct words, I said. I have a recording of my daughter-in-law admitting to the entire scheme, including the financial details. A low whistle came through the receiver. I see. Well, that changes things significantly. We can go to the police. We can file for a restraining order. We have options. No, I said quickly. Not yet. A legal battle is messy, and right now all they have done is talk. They haven't succeeded. Listen here, George. This isn't just about the law. This is about family. It's about respect. I took a breath. For now, I don't want to punish them. I want to teach them a lesson in respect. And I want to do it in a way that they will never, ever forget. George, who knew me better than almost anyone, understood immediately. This wasn't just about protecting my assets. This was about justice. My kind of justice. What do you have in mind, Carol? He asked, a hint of admiration in his voice. They think I'm a frail, confused old woman who is easily manipulated, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. It felt foreign but powerful. They think I'm broken, so I think it's time I gave them the performance of a lifetime. I'm going to need you to draw up some papers, George, and I need you to be ready to play your part. We spoke for another hour, the plan taking shape, each piece locking into place with beautiful, ruthless precision. When I hung up the phone, the sun was high in the sky. The house was bright and warm. It no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like my headquarters. I was in command again. All right, Victoria, I whispered to the empty, silent house. You want this house. You'll have to go through me to get it. You'll have to go through me, I had vowed. But the best way to win wasn't to build a wall, but to open the gate wide and set a beautiful, inviting trap. I spent the next 2 days preparing for my role. It was, I admit, a little thrilling. I hadn't felt such a surge of purpose in years. I was no longer a grieving widow or a potential burden. I was a director, a scriptwriter, and a lead actress, all rolled into one. I practiced in front of the hallway mirror. I let my shoulders slump just so. I practiced a slight tremor in my hand when reaching for my teacup. I coached myself to look just past people's eyes, to give the impression of a mind that was distracted and starting to fray at the edges. They came on Thursday evening, right on schedule. I knew they would. They wouldn't be able to resist coming to see if their poison had fully taken root. I heard their car door slam and took a deep, steadying breath, summoning the character I had created, the broken matriarch. I opened the door before they could knock, putting on a weak, watery smile. Oh, Michael, Victoria, I was just making some tea. Come in, come in. I moved slowly, letting my hand rest on the back of a chair as if for balance. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Victoria's gaze sweep over me, assessing. Her smile was blindingly bright, a predator's smile. Michael, on the other hand, couldn't seem to look at me at all. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his shoulders hunched with the weight of his guilt. Good. Guilt was a weakness I could use. Are you all right, Mom? He asked, his voice low. I waved a dismissive, trembling hand. Oh, I'm fine, dear, just a little tired. I sank into my armchair, letting out a soft, weary sigh that I had perfected that morning. Please sit down. They sat on the sofa opposite me, a portrait of feigned concern. Victoria leaned forward, her hands clasped. We were worried. You didn't answer when I called this afternoon. I had let it ring on purpose. I'm sorry, dear. I must have been napping. I seem to be doing that a lot lately. I looked down at my hands, clasped in my lap. Now for the opening act, I thought to myself. Let's see how they like the show. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I began, my voice soft and hesitant. About our conversation the other day, Michael. I chanced a look at him. He flinched. And I think you were right. I let that hang in the air. I could see Victoria's eyes light up, a flicker of pure victory before she masked it with a sympathetic frown. It's a lot, I continued, shaking my head slowly. This big old house. The memories are wonderful, of course, but the work, the worry, I just don't have the energy for it anymore. I'm not the woman I used to be. That much is true, my inner voice, the principal's voice, said with a smirk. I'm far more dangerous now. Victoria reached over and patted my knee. Her touch was cold, even through my slacks. Oh, Carol, we know, we just want what's best for you. Your happiness is the most important thing. The sheer audacity of her lie was almost breathtaking. I nearly broke character, but I held on. I gave her what I hoped was a grateful, teary-eyed look. That's why I need to ask you both a favor, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I was rather proud of that touch. I was going to call that realtor Brenda, the one you mentioned, but honestly the whole process just feels so overwhelming. All the paperwork, the negotiations. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I looked from Michael's guilty face to Victoria's greedy one. I focused on her, the true architect of this misery. You and Michael are both so smart about these things, so capable. I paused, taking a shaky breath for dramatic effect. I know it's a terrible thing to ask, but I was hoping. Would you be willing to handle it for me? The sale, I mean, would you? Would you take this burden off my shoulders? There it was. I had taken their ugliest word and polished it like a jewel, handing it back to them as a gift. It was a masterstroke, if I did say so myself. The effect was instantaneous. Michael looked up, his face a mess of relief so profound it was almost comical. He was being let off the hook. He wouldn't have to be the bad guy anymore. He could be the hero, helping his poor old mother. But Victoria, her reaction was the real prize. For one split second, her mask of concern fell away completely, and I saw it. Pure, unadulterated, triumphant glee. Her eyes widened, her lips parted in a silent yes. She had won. She had broken. Me, and now I was handing her the keys to the kingdom. It was gone as quickly as it came. She rearranged her face into a mask of selfless love, rushing to my side and taking both of my hands in hers. Oh, Carol, Mom, it's not a burden, not at all. It would be our honor. She squeezed my hands. Of course we'll help. Don't you worry about a single thing. We'll take care of everything. I looked up at her, my face a perfect picture of a grateful, weeping old woman. But my mind was a fortress of calculation. I watched the two of them, my son and his viper of a wife, and I felt nothing but the cold, thrilling certainty of a general watching the enemy march exactly where she wants them to go. They thought they were taking care of everything. They had no idea they were just taking their first steps into my trap. We'll take care of everything, she'd said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. And I knew, right then, that she would try to take everything she possibly could. I didn't have to wait long. Victoria, now empowered as my official family representative, moved with the speed and efficiency of a shark that smells blood in the water. She called me the very next morning, her voice buzzing with a false, cheerful energy. Carol, wonderful news. I've been on the phone all morning with the people from Sterling Developments. They are just so eager to move forward, and I've got the preliminary paperwork ready for you to look at. I can be over in an hour. Isn't it exciting? Exciting wasn't the word I would have chosen. Predatory, perhaps. Oh my, I said, injecting a note of manufactured fluster into my voice. So soon. All right, dear, I'll put the kettle on. She arrived alone, looking chic and professional in a navy blue pantsuit. She set a thick leather portfolio on my dining room table. Michael sends his love, she said, not even bothering to look at me. He's absolutely swamped at work today, so he asked me to walk you through this. Of course he was. She didn't want the weak link present. She wanted to handle the kill herself. As she began to pull out sheafs of intimidating, official-looking documents, I was already setting my own stage. I had spent the morning tidying up the study, and I'd brought a small wooden box of Frank's old things to the table. His reading glasses, a lucky silver dollar, a fountain pen, and nestled amongst them a small, sleek digital recorder. Victoria was already launching into her explanation, talking about escrow and titles and contingencies. I picked up the small silver device, turning it over in my hand. "Look at this silly thing," I said, interrupting her. She stopped, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "Frank bought this for me years ago. He wanted me to record my stories for the grandkids. I never could quite get the hang of it. The buttons are so tiny." My thumb, hidden from her view by my palm, found the small, indented circle. I felt the faintest click as the recording light, no bigger than a pinprick, blinked on. I set it down carefully on the table, right next to the cream and sugar, its tiny microphone pointed directly at her. "Now, what were you saying, dear?" I asked, putting on my reading glasses and squinting at the page she had pushed towards me. "Oh my, so many clauses, so many numbers. My eyes aren't what they used to be." I could feel her impatience growing. This was part of my plan. A rushed and arrogant person gets sloppy. I pointed a trembling finger to a dense paragraph of text. "What does this part say? It's all legal jargon to me." She let out a barely audible sigh. "That's just standard legal language about zoning, Carol. You don't need to worry about that." "Oh, okay." I squinted at another page. "And this, what is this fee here?" "Closing costs," she said, her voice tight. "Everyone pays them." Finally, after a few more moments of my frustrating, doddering performance, I pushed the papers away with a sigh of my own. "Victoria, you're so good at this and I'm just getting confused. Would you be a dear? Could you just read the most important parts out loud for me? I think I'd understand it better if I just heard it. The final sale price, especially. I want to be sure I hear it correctly." This was it, the moment the trap was sprung. She saw an opportunity, not a test. She believed I was a confused old woman asking to be led. She straightened a document, cleared her throat, and began to read in a clear, professional voice, perfect for a recording. "Okay," she began. "This is the final offer summary from Sterling Developments. It outlines the purchase of the property at 1245 Maple Drive. Blah, blah, blah. Transfer of title upon payment." She scanned the page, her finger stopping near the bottom. "All right, here we are. It states a final purchasing price, after all projected fees and taxes, of $650,000. She said it so smoothly, so convincingly. 650,000. George had already confirmed offer with Sterling Developments that morning, using a clever pretext. The real number was 850,000. A clean, neat $200,000 theft she was planning to skim right off the top. My blood ran cold, but I kept my face a perfect mask of placid confusion. I let the number hang in the air for a moment before I spoke. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice full of doe-eyed innocence. It seems a little low for a property this size, but I'm sure you know best, dear." I saw her suppress a smirk. She thought she had me. She thought I was a fool. "It's a very strong offer, Carol. The market is unpredictable," she said dismissively. "Well, if you say so." I reached over and picked up the small silver recorder. "This was all very complicated. My head is swimming. Let me just turn this silly thing off before it records all our secrets." I made a show of fumbling with the button, then gave a satisfied click and dropped the device, my prize, into the deep pocket of my cardigan. The evidence was secure. "Thank you for explaining it all, Victoria," I said, giving her a warm, trusting smile. "Why don't we have a final family meeting tomorrow to sign everything? You, me, and Michael. We should have my lawyer, George, come too, just to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Make it all official. The mention of a lawyer didn't scare her. On the contrary, it made her relax even more. To her, it just added a layer of legitimacy to her scam. It proved how utterly clueless I truly was. "What a wonderful idea, Carol," she said, gathering her papers. "I'll arrange it all." She walked out of my house that day convinced she was a genius. She had no idea she was just a fly walking deeper and deeper into my web. The next afternoon, the stage was set. My lawyer, George, was seated in Frank's armchair, looking as solid and immovable as an oak tree. And on the sofa, perched on the edge of the cushions, were Michael and Victoria. They were practically vibrating with ill-concealed excitement. They looked like vultures waiting for the last breath. The air in the living room was thick with a strange, formal tension. George had the real documents, the ones he and I had prepared, spread neatly on the coffee table. He walked them through the key points in his calm, steady lawyer's voice. I watched Victoria nod along, her expression one of intense focus, though I knew she wasn't listening to the words. She was just waiting for her prize. Michael just stared at the papers, his jaw tight. He hadn't looked me in the eye once. "So, if everyone understands," George said, looking at me, "all we need is your signature, Carol." He slid a single page and a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen across the table towards me. This was it, the final moment of their victory. I could see Victoria's hands clench in her lap in anticipation. I reached for the pen, my hand, for the first time in days, perfectly steady. I uncapped it with a soft click. I leaned forward, my shadow falling across the document. I poised the nib just an inch above the signature line where it said, Carol Ann Evans. The room held its breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, I set the pen down beside the paper. The sound, a soft clink of metal on wood, was as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. I leaned back in my chair and looked up. I let my gaze drift from George's neutral face to my son's nervous one, and finally I let it land and settle on Victoria. I let her see the change in my eyes. I let her see the fog of the confused old woman burn away, leaving behind the hard, clear ice of the principal. Her smile faltered. "Before we make this official," I said, and my voice was not the weak, hesitant whisper they had grown used to. It was the voice I used to use over the school's intercom system. Strong, clear, unquestionable. "I have a little home movie I'd like to share with everyone." I saw Michael and Victoria exchange a look of pure confusion. "A home movie, Mom?" Michael asked. "What are you talking about?" Victoria gave a tight, condescending little laugh. "Carol, maybe we should just focus on the paperwork for now." "Oh, I am focused," I said, giving her a smile that didn't touch my eyes. "This is part of the paperwork." I reached into the deep pocket of my cardigan, the one I had worn the day before. My fingers closed around the small, cool, metallic shape of the recorder. I pulled it out, not fumbling this time, and placed it squarely in the center of the coffee table, between them and the legal documents. Victoria stared at it. I saw the first flicker of true panic in her eyes, the dawning horror of recognition. I didn't say another word. I just pressed the play button. The room was utterly still, and then it was filled with the sound of Victoria's voice, crystal clear. "That's just standard legal language about zoning, Carol. You don't need to worry about that." I watched Michael's head snap towards his wife. "T." He recording continued. My own frail, questioning voice, then Victoria's again, sharp and impatient. "Closing costs. Everyone pays them." And then the moment of judgment. My own recorded voice, full of feigned naivety. "Could you just read the important parts out loud for me? The final sale price, especially." And Victoria's voice, the voice of a thief, confident and clear. "All right, here we are. It states a final purchasing price, after all projected fees and taxes, of $650,000. The color drained from Michael's face. It was as if all the blood had simply vanished, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of disbelief. He stared at his wife, his mouth slightly agape, as her treachery, in her own voice, echoed off the walls of the house he grew up in. Victoria was frozen solid. The mask of the loving, concerned daughter-in-law didn't just crack. It exploded, leaving behind the raw, terrified face of a common criminal caught in the act. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted from the recorder to my face, to George's stony expression, searching for an escape that simply wasn't there. She had been so clever, so sure of my weakness, that she never once considered that I might be a better predator than she was. I let the silence after the recording stretch for a long, painful moment. I wanted them to sit in it. I wanted them to choke on it. Then, with a steady hand, I reached forward and pressed the stop button. The silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. I turned my head slowly, deliberately ignoring the panicked animal trapped on my sofa, and looked directly at my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had broken my heart. My voice was cold, colder than a Kansas City winter. "Michael," I said, "explain this to me." The silence that followed was heavier than any stone. It was the sound of a family breaking, the sharp, invisible crack of trust shattering into a million pieces. Michael was a statue of shame, his head in his hands. And Victoria was a cornered animal, her eyes wild with panic. She was the first to speak, her voice a high-pitched, ugly thing. "That's not, you twisted my words. This is ridiculous. He's your son, Carol. How could you do this to him? To us?" She then turned on George. "And you, this is entrapment. You're a lawyer, you can't just record people without their consent." George didn't even flinch. He looked at her with the same dispassionate calm he'd use on a mildly interesting insect. "Ma'am," he began, his voice cutting through her frantic lies with quiet authority. "First, in the state of Missouri, only one party needs to consent to a recording. My client, Carol, consented. It is perfectly legal. Second, what we have just heard is a clear admission to a conspiracy to commit fraud against an elderly person. The amount you specified, a $200,000 discrepancy, elevates this from a simple civil matter to a potential felony. This is not a family squabble. This is a crime." Every word George spoke was a nail in her coffin. I watched the fight drain out of Victoria, replaced by the pale, clammy sheen of pure fear. She finally understood. This wasn't a game she could talk her way out of. But I wasn't looking at her anymore. My attention was on my son, my broken, foolish son. He was rocking back and forth slightly, making a sound that was half a sob, half a choke. "I didn't know," he whispered into his hands. "I swear, Mom, I didn't know about the money. I thought, she told me you were lonely, that the house was too much. I thought we were helping." "Helping?" I asked, and my voice was quiet, but it sliced through his pathetic excuses. I stood up and walked to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at me. It took him a moment, but he finally lifted his head. His face was a wreck, splotchy, swollen, and wet with tears. It was the face of a stranger. "Look at me, Michael," I said. He tried, but his gaze kept sliding away. "You say you didn't know about the fraud. Let's pretend for a moment that's true. It doesn't change what you did know. You knew you came into my home and called your mother a burden to her face. You did that. You looked me in the eye and you used that word like a weapon. The why you did it doesn't erase the what you did." I let him absorb that. I let him sit with the weight of his own actions, separate from hers. He was not an innocent victim in this. He was an accomplice, a willing tool. "That woman," I said, gesturing towards Victoria with a flick of my head, refusing to grant her the dignity of looking at her, "is a criminal who tried to steal from this family. You are my son who held the door open for her. Right now, in this room, you have a choice to make. It is the most important choice of your life." He stared at me, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "You can stand up, walk out that door with her, and embrace whatever future that entails. Or you can stay here, In this house you helped defile, and you can. Begin the long, hard work of understanding the cost of what you have done. The choice is yours, but you can only choose one. The ultimatum hung in the room, absolute and final. This was not a negotiation. It was a judgment. Michael's sobbing grew louder, a desperate, gasping sound. He looked at me, his mother, the very picture of cold, righteous anger. Then his gaze shifted to his wife. Victoria looked back at him, her face a mask of terror. Her last hope was this weak, broken man she had so expertly controlled. But she must have seen something in his eyes, or rather, the lack of something. There was no rescue there, no defense, only shame. She finally understood that she was utterly and completely alone. Her fear curdled into rage. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. She snatched her purse from the sofa. Her eyes, when they met mine, were full of pure reptilian hatred. "You think you've won, you old witch," she hissed. "You've just destroyed your own family." "No, dear," I replied, my voice dangerously soft. "You did that all by yourself." With a strangled cry of fury, she turned and fled. We heard her running down the hall, the frantic sound of her heels clicking on the wood. The front door was thrown open, and then slammed shut with a deafening, final boom that seemed to shake the entire house. And then there were three: me, my lawyer, and my son who sat weeping amidst the ruins of the life he had helped destroy. The immediate threat was gone, but the real damage, the deep, foundational cracks in our family remained. When the door slammed, it felt like the house took its first clean breath in months. The toxic presence that had been poisoning the air was finally gone. Michael was still a wreck, of course, a grown man folded in on himself with ragged sobs, but that was his mess to clean now. I had work to do. I let George handle it. He spoke to Michael in a low, firm voice, not unkindly, but without a shred of pity. He advised him to get his own legal counsel and to go home to figure out what was left of his life. I simply stood by the fireplace, my back straight, and waited. I didn't offer a hug. I didn't offer a comforting word. The time for that was long past. This was the time for consequences. When Michael finally shuffled out the door, a ghost in his own childhood home, I didn't feel sadness. I felt quiet. The quiet of a battlefield after the fighting is over. "Are you all right, Carol?" George asked, his voice full of genuine concern. "I will be," I said, turning to face him. "Now, about sterling developments. I want you to call them first thing in the morning." "What should I tell them?" A slow, satisfied smile touched my lips. "Tell them the owner of the property at 1245 Maple Drive has reviewed their unsolicited offer and has decided to respectfully decline. No further correspondence is necessary." "No counteroffer?" George asked, a twinkle in his eye. "None whatsoever," I said. "Some things are not for sale." And with that single act, I took back my power. The entire scheme, the web of lies, the cruel word burden, it all unraveled into nothing. Victoria would not get her payday. The next week was a whirlwind of decisive action. I did not sell the house to a developer who would tear it down and erase its soul. I was done with destruction. I wanted to build. So I hired a smart, no-nonsense realtor, a woman my age who understood that a home's value isn't just in its square footage. I gave her very specific instructions. "I don't want a bidding war, and I don't want the highest offer," I told her. "I want the right family." She understood. We held one open house. I sat in the kitchen, observing. I saw people walk through, their eyes calculating, seeing only investment potential and renovation costs. And then a young family came in. A man and a woman, their faces full of awe and a little bit of hope. They had two small children, a boy about 7 and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4. I watched as the little girl, her hair in pigtails, walked over to the kitchen doorframe and gently touched the faint pencil marks that charted Michael's growth. She looked up at her mother and asked, "Can we do this for me, Mommy?" Her mother knelt down, a tear in her eye, and said, "If we're very, very lucky, sweetie." That was it. That was all I needed to see. They were the ones. They would fill the house with new laughter, new memories. They would honor its past by building a beautiful future. We accepted their offer that evening. It was for the full, fair market price, a significant sum, but seeing the joy on their faces was the real profit. The closing was quick, and suddenly I was standing on the curb, watching another family's moving truck pull up to the house that had been my entire world. It was a strange feeling, but it wasn't sad. It was light. I felt light. With George's help, I found a wonderful financial advisor, a sharp woman who reminded me of my self. We invested the proceeds from the sale wisely. We set up trusts and annuities. We secured my future in a way that meant I would never have to depend on anyone for anything, ever again. This was my financial victory, a fortress made of numbers and good sense. Then came the final step, finding my new home. This time, when I sat down at my laptop, I wasn't a victim. I was a discerning buyer. I wasn't looking for a place to hide. I was looking for a place to live. I found it on the 12th floor of a beautiful new building downtown, overlooking a park. It was a 2-bedroom condo, filled with light from floor-to-ceiling windows. It was modern and clean, with a kitchen where everything worked and a balcony big enough for 2 chairs and a pot of geraniums. It was the opposite of my old house in every way, and I loved it instantly. It was a home with no ghosts. Now, as I stand here in my new living room, the late afternoon sun streaming in, I'm slowly unpacking. Not everything, just a few things. A small box I'd labeled essentials. In it is my favorite picture of Frank, his smile as warm as the sunlight on my face. There are a few of Michael's kindergarten drawings and my old copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The pain of my son's betrayal isn't gone. I don't think a wound that deep ever truly disappears. But it's a scar now, not an open wound. It no longer dictates my life. It no longer owns me. I look out my window at the city stretching out below, at the green of the park and the endless sky, and I feel a sense of peace that I thought I had lost forever. They say time heals all wounds. I don't think that's true. It doesn't heal them, it just teaches you how to live with the scars. Some scars fade into thin, silver lines, barely noticeable. Others remain thick and puckered, a permanent reminder of the pain. It's been 6 months since I sold the house on Maple Drive. 6 months since my world cracked open and was rebuilt into something new. My life now is quieter, but in a good way. It's the quiet of peace, not the quiet of loneliness. I joined a book club at the local library, and unlike the one Victoria imagined for me, this one is full of sharp, funny women who drink too much coffee and argue about plot points. I've started volunteering there twice a week, helping teenagers find books. It turns out, my principal voice is still quite effective at recommending classic literature. My new home, my condo in the sky, feels more like me than the old house had in years. It's neat, efficient, and filled with light. There are no ghosts here, no lingering whispers of bitterness or betrayal. Just me, my books, and a spectacular view of the sunset over the city. In the quiet moments, I've had time to think, to be honest with myself. And the truth is, the true burden I was carrying wasn't the house. It wasn't my age. It was my own pride. My blind spot. I was so confident in my ability to read people, so certain I knew my own son that I couldn't see the rot that had set in. I dismissed the warning signs because I couldn't bear to admit that I, Carol Evans, could be fooled. That I could raise a son who would be so easily led by a woman as transparently greedy as Victoria. Facing that truth was harder than facing their scheme. But I did face it. And in doing so, I finally unburdened myself. 2 days ago, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain white, and my address was written in Michael's familiar, slightly messy script. My heart didn't pound when I saw it. It just stilled. I set it on my kitchen counter and left it there for a full day, looking at it every so often. It wasn't that I was afraid of it. I was just deciding if I was ready to let the past back in, even for a moment. This morning, with my cup of coffee in hand, I decided I was. I slit it open with my butter knife. The letter was 1 page, front and back. "Dear Mom," it began. "I am writing this from a small apartment across town. I'm not sure if you know, but Victoria and I have separated. I filed for divorce last month. The legal proceedings are complicated. It seems my testimony regarding her financial dealings was of great interest to the authorities. That is the consequence of her actions. This letter is about the consequences of mine." I paused and took a sip of coffee. My hand was steady. "I have started seeing a therapist," the letter continued. "We talk a lot about weakness and about how easy it is to let someone else's voice become louder than your own conscience. Victoria preyed on my insecurities, my feeling that I'd never measured up to Dad, my financial pressures. She told me what I wanted to hear, that the problem wasn't me, it was the burden of my obligations. It was a coward's excuse, and I took it. There is no excuse for what I did. Calling you a burden was the most shameful moment of my life. It was a betrayal of you, of Dad's memory, and of the man I was raised to be." He wrote that he was working 2 jobs now, trying to pay back debts Victoria had accrued. He wrote that he finally understood that integrity was worth more than any developer's offer. "I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness," the letter concluded. "I know I have not earned it. I may never earn it. I am writing this simply so that you know. So that you know I am finally, truly, facing the truth of what I have done. And so that you know how profoundly sorry I am." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. There were no tears in my eyes. The gaping wound he had left was no longer there. In its place was a scar, and I could touch it now without flinching. Forgiveness was a distant country I wasn't ready to visit, but for the first time I could see it on a map. I set the letter aside on the counter. The decision about what to do with it, if anything, could wait. It no longer controlled my day. I picked up my coffee and walked to the large window in my living room, looking out at the endless sky. The sun was bright, the city was alive, and my future was my own. I was no one's burden. I was free. A home, I've learned, is more than just a place with a roof and 4 walls. It's supposed to be a sanctuary of respect and love. And when that respect is gone, it becomes just a building. The truth is, sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who can wound us the deepest. They try to write our final chapter for us, to define us by their own needs and their own narratives. They might call you a burden. They might call you old or confused or weak. But their words do not have to be your truth. Your worth is not a reflection in their eyes. It is a fire you keep burning inside yourself. Finding the strength to pick up a pen and write your own ending, on your own terms, that is the most powerful victory of all. Perhaps you felt it too. That quiet dismissal, the feeling of your voice not being heard. The pain of being underestimated by the very people who should know your strength. That's why I wanted to share this story. It's why all of our stories are so important. There is strength in our voices. In our shared experiences, we find validation and courage. If a piece of this story resonated with you, I invite you to share your own thoughts in the comments below. Let's build a community where no one feels invisible. Like this video if you believe in the power of starting over, and please subscribe to hear more stories of survival and strength. Thank you for listening.